This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
I think we'll start since it's after 11. Welcome everyone to this session, Histories of Place. I'm Amanda James from History SA. I would like to introduce our first speaker for today, Liz Harfull. Liz has worked as a journalist and in PR. She has authored 2 bestsellers, The Blue Ribbon Cookbook and Women of the Land, and she's about to release Almost an Island, The Story of Robe. And today she's going to talk about the tradition of summer holidays at Robe.
This is an exciting moment for me because I've been researching and writing this book for 7 years, and this is the first public outing of any of my research, so don't ask too many hard questions at the end of it all. So in 1908, a small, elegantly designed booklet was produced to market Robe as a holiday destination, subtitled The Sanatorium of South Australia. It's not a place for crazy people, it's a place to go and recover your health. And it promoted notions quite popular in the Edwardian era, when seaside vacations were about the health benefits, not just pleasure. Medical opinion of the day endorsed the therapeutic value of sea air, salt water bathing and escaping Australia's uncivilised heat. So according to this booklet, with its cool, calming climate reminiscent of England, Robe stood absolutely unrivalled as a place to go for a holiday. And it's easy to see why that might be the case, and as the title of the book suggests, Robe is in fact physically virtually an island. It's surrounded on 3 sides by water, and on the 4th side is a series of lakes and drains, and you have to drive over 2 bridges to get into it. So the worst summer winds come from the north straight over Goshen Bay, so the temperatures stay moderate. The booklet even incorporated an official letter from the state's Weather Bureau, and during the previous January, according to the head observer, the mean maximum temperature in Adelaide was 94.7, while down at Robe it was a very balmy 80.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Robe is a spot where no hot winds prevail, no dust storms, no plagues of flies and mosquitoes, and that every summer night is so cool that one need never remove the blankets from the bed. As people picked up themselves up after the horrors of the First World War, the town realised that this was an era of fresh opportunity. But there was a serious lack of transport to Robe and a drastic shortage of accommodation. In fact, in the mid-1920s, it was estimated that only 1 in 6 of any people looking for accommodation in Robe actually managed to stay there. And the concerned citizens decided to form a progress association to try and change things. And one of the first things they did was set up a camping ground, which was nestled between the town and West Beach. And it offered fresh water, firewood, sanitary conveniences. I'm not sure what those were. Tent poles and stakes for $1 per day per tent. They also planted the Norfolk Island pines that grow along the foreshore at Robe, that if you've been there you would remember quite distinctly. And they set up a tennis court on the foreshore, which was there, and I used to play tennis there when I was a kid. It was there until about 20 years ago. All features they hoped would draw the visitors. With more people now owning cars, the new campsite proved so popular that the following year it was expanded, and single men were directed to set up their tents in one place, and then there was a special spot organised near the old jail for families and lady campers. And the Mail newspaper in Adelaide reported, "Throughout the world, motor camping is becoming popular, and while the Robe Progress Association does not consider its camps at all equal to those in America, such facilities as are provided will help make the camping holiday a pleasant one." Within a few years, motor camping was all the rage. People were packing their bags and hitting the roads with tents and caravans and sleeping trailers in record numbers to explore regional Australia, attracted by the relatively cheap price and the spirit of freedom that came from, as one paper put it, going where one likes for as long as one likes and just when one likes, in happy freedom from timetables or dinner gongs or dressing bells. But not everyone was happy with the concept of camping. Many visitors wanted just a little bit more luxury than that. And so in the late 1920s, the town's only remaining licensed public house, the Robe Hotel, underwent major redevelopment. It was known originally as the Biennial, and the hotel had opened for business in 1847 within a few months of the colony of the settlement being formed. In fact, they applied for a licence before the settlement even existed, but they were turned down. In January 1906, it was purchased by the Adelaide-based wine merchant firm AE&F Tollies for £542, and the family continued to own the pub for the next 90 years. One of its most popular publicans was Annie Fax. Annie initially ran the business with her husband, who had the wonderful name of James Hurtle Fax, who took up the licence in about 1926. And they oversaw a major redevelopment, which involved adding a whole new wing to the front of the pub and an upper storey area. So it had 32 bedrooms, 5 new bathrooms, one of which had a very famous marble bath that you can still see in the foyer of the hotel, hot and cold running water in every guest room, and a new kitchen and servery. And the work was completed by February 1928 at a cost of £9,000, so no small sign those days. Guests paid the princely sum of 12 shillings in the winter for accommodation, or 14 shillings in summer. By 1929, the hotel also boasted its own floodlit tennis court, which you can just see there on the right, along with a motorboat that you could take out to go fishing. For others, the obvious answer to the shortage of accommodation at Robe was to build or acquire a summer house, a holiday home. And the people in the 1920s were by no means the first ones to think of this. Robe's first and grandest and probably best known summer house is Karratha, overlooking Lake Butler. And that was built by a wealthy squatter called Henry Jones, who started quite a trend. He built it so that his English wife could escape the heat in their sheep station, Biennial, which is about 150 kilometres to the northeast, and over the time it could only be reached via rough bush tracks. So Henry and his 2 brothers became quite wealthy pastoralists as a result of the gold rush. They were well placed to send meat to the goldfields, and they made a fortune. And when things were going quite well, Henry decided to take himself back to England and find a wife. And he married Frances Eliza Caton, who we would all know without knowing it, in that she, the township of Frances, south of Bordertown, was named after her. She and Henry arrived back in Robe in April 57. There was a salute of the guns from Flagstaff Hill, as befits a wealthy pastoralist, and Henry unloaded a very handsome 4-in-hand carriage that he'd brought back from Europe. He was known as Flash Harry. He was a bit of a noted whip, fond of showing off his driving skills, and one of the favourite stories at Robe is that he tried to take bets one day to be able to drive his carriage around the obelisk, which he wouldn't want to attempt now because he'd fall in the sea. Henry called tenders to build Karratha House in 1862. Locals learnt of his plans with great interest, hoping it would start a new trend and provide a wonderful ornament to the town. And Karratha didn't disappoint. It's approached by a road that ran across where the channel into Lake Butler is now, and it was a 2-storey house designed by the former colonial architect Edward Angus Hamilton. His legacies include Adelaide's Treasury buildings and the Governor's small summer retreat at Belair. It was surrounded by stone walls facing Lake Butler. Originally designed to have 2 wings, Henry ran out of money, and so for a long time it only had one, but it was still considered quite magnificent. Now, the Jones family enjoyed Karratha in all fine English style, entertaining people as lavishly as they could, but through a series of circumstances, things changed for them, and things didn't go too well on the station, and they ended up having to give up Karratha and go back to England. In December 1870, Karratha acquired a summer residence of such grandeur that Robe still basks in the reflected glory. Like the Joneses, South Australia's Governor, Sir James Ferguson, was looking for a house where he could take his family to escape the heat. And the decision was not without controversy, because there were already viceregal properties at Glenelg and up in the Adelaide Hills, and the public and other politicians and the media all wanted to know why on earth he'd need another place so far away from the seat of government. But he held sway and took over Karratha, and the family went there for the next 3 summers. They put a lot of money into renovating Karratha and extending it and adding servants' quarters. And unfortunately, the governor's wife didn't really have a chance to enjoy that, because she died in October 71, a few months after giving birth, and she'd never really recovered. And she was only 32. And Sir James ended up going on to become Governor of New Zealand. His children had one last summer holiday at Robe on their own, and I know that because I've found reports of his son being rescued from drowning in the lake. So over the next few decades, Karratha was associated with some of South Australia's best-known pastoralists. The next residents thought to have been Robert Stockdale, who owned Lake Eliza Station near Robe, and he took up land on Kangaroo Island that he named after Karratha. And there is a link between the ship Karratha that used to run to the Kangaroo Island and back. By 1900, it was being leased to Henry Dutton from the famous Anlaby station, and he would go down there with his very sleek yacht, the Mavis, and he also had a coach with liveried footmen, which he drove around the town. It must have startled the locals. But perhaps the pastor's family most closely, it's Karratha today. They hold a lot of community events so people can go and enjoy wine and food. The people who own it actually have a winery, which is quite convenient. The pastoral family that's most closely associated with Robe from this period, though, were the Bowmans of Poltalloch Station near Meningie. Keith Bowman bought Bank House in Similly Street. The former bank was designed by prominent colonial architect Edmund Wright in the 1860s, when Robe was one of the most important ports in southern Australia, shipping wool worth more than £1 million in a 10-year period, when clippers traded direct with London. A keen amateur sportsman, Bowman loved to drive fast cars, race horses, shoot, sail and fish, and he indulged all those passions at Robe. He spent weeks there every summer, accompanied by a very large entourage of friends and relatives. 2 of his daughters, Lady Nancy Jude and Mary Cowan, recalled that the party might include as many as 20 people. And to keep them entertained, they organised tennis and golf tournaments, cricket games and musical nights in the Robe Institute. They employed local people as household staff and spent significant amounts of on food and supplies, which effectively kick-started the entire economy of the town every time they arrived. And this was the time when the port was no longer doing business and things were very tough for local families. The Bowmans were extremely generous. Every Christmas, Mrs. Bowman ordered extra cuts of beef and lamb from the local butcher and asked him to deliver them to the town's poor. And they also shared all the excess catch that they caught every day when they were out fishing on the Dora Bassett. Now, the Dora Bassett was a very well-known sight in Gieschen Bay during the summer months, and locals were engaged as crew to take her out fishing or on expeditions across the bay to Bodan Rocks. And in good weather, the local bank manager was more often not out there fishing with them. He'd put a closed for business sign on the door. As Mary Cowan recalled, everyone would come. Even the council couldn't work because the clerk would come out with us. But my father said, I've never managed to shut the post office. Everything stopped for fishing. It's likely that Keith Bowman was also responsible for what remains today one of the most popular things to do in Robe, and that's driving on Long Beach. In December 1925, he bought every roll of wire netting in the town's 2 hardware stores, and he made a track through the sand dunes. This was a big project, said Don Stewart, who was about 13 at the time. We laid this netting right across the sand hills onto the hard sand and drove the cars onto the beach. And Mr. Bowman had the time of his life. It was just like a racing track, you see, and he went screaming down the beach. At one point, the car hit a scoop in the sand and one of the passengers was thrown off the back seat, her head going through the canvas roof. There were plenty of misadventures in the 1930s too, when the Ryans from Mount Bruce Station and the McBrides from Conmurra took up sand planing behind the family car. Pat Ryan, who was a young girl at the time, later married Philip McBride, and she recalls that everything was quite fine while her father was driving. We just went along at a steady pace on this piece of iron sitting on a bag, and then the McBride boys came down, and they warmed things up a little. They went a bit faster, and they started swerving. Sport came to an abrupt end after someone came flying off the iron and badly gashed their foot. In fact, fast cars weren't the only speedy forms of transport that these families enjoyed. They spent hours playing around with boats. In December 1928, the Ryans claimed the Silver Cup in a handicap event in Geishan Bay as part of the town's annual summer regatta. And this is a view taken from the old jetty looking back towards the foreshore, the Customs House, which is still standing today, and Flagstaff Hill. So the regatta ran for quite a few years, and they had an amusement park on the foreshore with a roundabout. And they also had speedboat races. This is the Johnny Walker, which had a top speed of 50 kilometres an hour, being piloted by the local postmaster, Reg Jarvis. The war years put a dampener on summer holidays at Roe, but in the 50s, a whole new era started to emerge. I guess one of the most fascinating parts of this entire history for me is the surfing, is the first start of building at Long Beach. This is a group of families that they used to travel everywhere, the kids in the trailer. Can you imagine getting away with that today? This was the first shack built at Long Beach. In the early 1950s, Long Beach was basically scrubbed. No power, no water, no supplies. And the Shinkle family from Cobra went for a drive down a track and found these blocks of land which someone had very optimistically put up for sale. And he thought it was such a great spot that he bought one for himself and one for each of his 4 sons, and his brother did the same thing. The top price they paid was £60. And on this block they built, it was after the war, building materials were in short supply. They managed to get hold of 2 ex-Air Force Nissan huts, and one of them became the first beach shack at Long Beach, which is now one of the most popular places to build a beach shack in the southeast. It's still standing. The family love it, and they're determined to keep it, even though it is surrounded by million-dollar custom homes these days. I'm not sure what the neighbours think, but it's part of the whole tradition of Long Beach, and people love it. I want to move on to the next exciting era in Robe's history. Although in the 1960s, when tourism was starting to take off down there, it wasn't just caravanners that arrived, because the surfers showed up too. And it was one of the most fun I had in researching the book. The influx was led by a guy called Steve Woolston, who was a gun shearer from Keith, and he came to town with a group of mates on a longboard in search of the perfect wave. Calling themselves the Green Desert Surf Riders, the crew would drive over on a Friday, and if the weather was right, they'd surf all weekend. And Steve remembers driving into town one day with a ute load of surfing boards and his swag and his blue heeler dog, and pulling up in front of a cafe, and this woman rushed out. "I've heard about you surfers, you keep away from our daughters," she said. And Steve infuriated her by looking at her and said, "Oh, you've got daughters, have you?" And as he put it to me, the boys had come to town. In 1966, Steve acquired a hawker's licence, and he set up a business which is probably one of the oldest surf shops still owned by the same family. He would go to the beach every day surfing in a rocket, which he would buy every year because the salt water would rust it out, so a different vehicle every year. He had friends who just wanted to come to Robe to surf and needed an excuse, so they set up a fish and chip bar, which he says hardly sold any fish and chips at all. That wasn't the point. He was also connected in with the people who owned Jeff's surf shop in Adelaide, Ronnie Smith, and who came down every summer to join him. This is the till in the shop. It's still in use. His son runs the business now, wouldn't dream of changing it. It's a piece of surfing history. And this is the first surfing competition. It's one of the oldest surfing competitions in the world. In fact, we think it might be only second to Bells Beach. It's been running continuously since 1968, every Easter, and it's never been called off because of bad weather. But the first one almost was cancelled. It turned into a paddling race because there was no waves. I'll leave it there. Is that out of time? Thank you. Yes.
It was wonderful to see, the ephemera historical photographs and as part of your research and illustrating. I just wondered where oral history
Yeah.
also where perhaps that's positive?
Oral history was a really important part because the first part of this book is very much a formal history, but the second part is very much about people's memories. And I was very lucky in that in the 1980s there was quite a significant oral history collection put together at Robe, and I could draw back on that. But I've also myself over the last few years done about 50 or 60 informal interviews. I'm a journalist by training, so I approached those very much in an informal way. Recorded with people's permission, but I'm in the process of setting up a new oral history group that will actually go back and revisit some of those people and gather things in a more formal way. But yes, oral history and people's memories. You know, there's the art of storytelling in the front bars of the Caledonian and the Robe Hotel and the fishermen down at the docks. You know, they're the keepers of the stories, so it's the only way really to really gather the colour and the sense of what this place is about and what it means to people. Oh, is this?
I was struck by doing research, as you know, myself on road history,
Yes.
but my own family history. I'll tell you my mother, because she used to go down in the car in the morning to stay at the Rome Hotel. But I was struck by the fact that Rome is also one of those towns which attract people back to it.
Yes.
Her great-great-grandfather was the bank manager, as you just showed, and he died and the family moved back to Adelaide. His widow bought what was at that point the unlicensed Caledonian Hotel.
Right.
And she had a summer home, and that
Yes.
was the end of the 19th century.
Yes.
And I think that actually happened quite a lot.
It did. It's one of the things that actually I was asked to write this book by Wakefield Press, and it's one of the things that triggered that idea and my concepts for the book in the first place is that there are families who've been going there for holidays for 6-7 generations, and there's something about the town that doesn't let you go. People keep going back there once they've discovered it, and I was quite curious to try and explore what might have led to that and what it was that made this place a magical place for so many people, including my own family. And my great-grandfather was a carrier who went to Robe with a load of wool and ended up taking a group of Chinese across to the goldfields. And my family went down there exploring that history and ended up buying a house, and 50 years later we've still got it. It is a place that once you kind of spend any time there, it does grab hold of you. And a lot of the memories in the book, I think, capture that and explore why, and why families went back there and what they love about it. Yes. I did. Yes, I did. In one session in particular, there was no time to go through it today, but there is in fact an entire neighbourhood that for more than 40 years has been settling into the caravan park at Long Beach. It started before the caravan park even opened, when a family rocked up with a caravan and the guy who was building it said, "Oh yeah, you can pull up under the tree for the night." And they have been going back, and cumulatively generations of the family and their friends, they now take up many blocks at the centre of the caravan park, which they rebook every year. One of the guys moved to Queensland, he still came back. Another one has a family holiday house in Robe that he's bought. He still stays at the caravan park for a month every January because they just have so much fun together. And their memories of what it was like at that caravan park, the weekly concerts, the bonfires on the beach, two people who met there as teenagers are married and now take their children. So there's some wonderful stories from the holidaymakers. Yeah, very much part of it.
Any more questions? Got time for another one? Well,
Okay.
AB help. Is the book finished?
It's about to go off to the printers. It'll be back before Christmas. So yes, there is some information about it. I think Wakefield has a table here, which I haven't discovered yet, but they have some information. So hopefully it'll be out late November, early December. Yeah, sure.
The oral history interviews, are they going to be kept at the State Library or anything like that? Are you going to put those in archive?
Yeah, I've actually given an undertaking to the Robe Library that all of the material I've gathered up through my research I will hand over to the public record when I'm done. They actually don't have a history room at the moment. They're in the process of renovating it. So the history collection is locked away. In fact, it was locked away for a lot of the time I was working on this book. But once that's, sorted and there's a space for it, I will hand over everything. And as I said, in the meantime, I'm working with the other locals to set up an oral history group, and we'll go back and revisit some of the people I interviewed where I did very informal interviews and capture their memories and additional things to add into the collection. I always saw this right from the beginning, that I didn't want to be selfish about the material I was gathering up as an author, that I wanted to, because I've only been able to use a fraction of the amazing things I've been able to collect, thousands of photographs and ephemera and memories and things. So it was always my intention right from the beginning to put it back to the place that it belongs to, so others can access it.
One of the things that occurred to me there was with those photographs you had of the group of cars on the beach or something.
Yeah.
It looked like a family snap. Did you actually get a lot
I
of
did.
family snaps?
I've spent years going and having cups of tea with people and looking through family albums and harassing people to share things they think I wouldn't be interested in. And I tried to show them that quite often what they thought was a family snap had incredible information in it, in the background. And so one of my prized possessions is a photograph taken in the main street of a couple on a date, and behind them is a poster for the Robe Talkies, which shows what it cost to get into the Institute to go and see a movie and what was showing. And this family had kind of discounted that photo, and when I started looking at it and all the detail, I said, no, that's perfect. So yes, a lot of family albums have been raided, and I know, despite how many years and how much publicity down there to encourage people to share, I know there's more going to come out as soon as the book comes out. It's inevitable. So I don't think the process has ended by any means. It's probably just the beginning.